Hello and welcome to this session on spread operator in JavaScript. So as promised in the last session, in this particular one, we'll see how to reduce and optimize the code whatever we wrote in the previous session. We'll see something called a spread operator in JavaScript ES6 that will help us basically make use of any data structure that consists of some entries, and how we can expand on the elements or on those entries of the data structure. So what I mean by this expansion and spreading, in order to understand that, let's head over to our code sandbox. So I hope you can see this now. So spread operator is something via which you can find ways to reduce amount of code and simplify it. So let's first see what this really does. Okay, for that I'm inside my index.js. let's say initially I comment this out everything, and in here, for example, we have two arrays. All right, so the first array that I have, I'm going to call it reptiles. Okay, and they will consist of names of some of the reptiles. So let me quickly fill it in. Snake and croc, and let's say I have a lizard with me. All right, and in the second array, for example, we are now taking the animals that are mammals. So let's call them lion and elephant and tiger. Okay, so now we have these two arrays with us. These consist of strings. So for example, let's say you want to append this particular array, the elements, these three elements, you want to add it at the end of this particular array. So basically, in the brute force approach, either you can do it individually by taking these individual elements, accessing them, and then pushing them back or appending them on this mammals array. So here's where the spread operator comes into picture, in which it will show us how to achieve this simple task that would otherwise take some lines of code. So what I mean by that is, spread operator is nothing but 1, 2 and 3 dot operators. All right, and this particular spread operator, we want it to be applied on this particular array. So what I mean by this is, you'll understand in a moment. So what I am saying is, this spread operator, what it does is, first of all, whenever in doubt, we should always try to log our problems onto the console. So if I head over into console now, you can see that after lion, elephant, tiger, which means after this mammals array, we can see that each element of this reptiles array, in which we have snake, croc, lizard, and let's say inside, if I add Komodo as well, so you can see this is now also added in here, which means that this spread operator, it took this reptiles array, it expanded it or spread it into the individual elements and added each of these items into the position wherever we specified this spread operator. All right, so what do I mean by saying that it actually adds these spreaded elements at the position where we mention the spread operator? In order to cross check it, I'm going to cut this from here, and let's say I'm going to paste it here on the second position of this array. So now what you will see is, after the line, the entire reptiles array, the expanded version in which every individual element is appended here, will be added. As you can see, after line, the entire reptiles array has been appended, and then the remaining elements follow. Okay, so that was basically what spread operator is. Now this was the first variant in which we saw how it works with our arrays. Now what about objects? Does it function the same with objects as well? Let's try to take a look in this. For example, I create a new object with constant and I call this object name. So let's say this object of mine consists of 2 entries. Maybe some of you saw this coming. So this particular object is called name. It consists of 2 entries, fname and lname, both of which is a string. And now I am going to create a new name. Okay, and what I want is I want both of these entries to get appended inside this new name object as well. So for that, what I'm doing is I'm putting these 3 dot operators and mentioning the name, which is actually the name of the previous object. And for example, I specify some key value pairs of this as well. For example, let's say I have another thing like this. Okay, so according to my claim, the entries of this name object, which means the fname, which is equals to Bruce, and lname, that is equals to Wayne, both of these key value pairs must be added as key value pairs inside this new name, apart from these 2 attributes. In order to cross check this, we can try logging this like this. And now if we take a look inside the console, you will be able to see that this fname and lname is included as normal key value pairs that we would have otherwise added inside our object called new name by the usage of this spread operator. Now some of you might be wondering, what would happen if we directly mentioned this name here instead of usage of these 3 dots. So let's see what happens if we remove this. Now if we take a look inside this new name object of ours, you'll be able to see that instead of actually spreading and adding or appending the individual elements of name object inside new name, by the simple mentioning of the name object here, it actually returned a nested object. All right, so what we can see in here is that as an attribute of this new name object, we get another object. So this is now a nested object instead, which is not what we wanted. We wanted to actually spread it and make use of we actually wanted to make use of the elements, the individual elements of this particular object inside our new object. Okay, this way we are able to retain whatever the attributes of our initial object was. So when I say this, that we are now successful in retaining the initial key value pairs or the initial attributes of an object into our new object. Does it ring a bell? So if by seeing this you remember some previous problem that we faced, then you are absolutely correct. This was precisely the issue that we had while we were working on this handling complex state session of ours, in which we were required to again and again refer to the previous version of our stateful object. Now what I mean by that is, let us again head back to app.jsx. So in here you can see up till now we are forced to make use of all of these if-else statements and then updating all of these elements or all of these entries one by one by the usage of the previous version. So what I am hoping to do is this if-else, this is the bracket of this. So let's try to remove all of these like this. And now instead of having all of them, what we can do is we can return an object which consists of all of the elements, all of the key value pairs we wanted to retain it from the previous version of our object contact. All right. And what else do we want? We want to update the particular attribute which is the name one. So if you take a closer look inside here, the name called fname, which means the name that is associated with the corresponding input field, is actually the same one that is the key in these attributes inside our object. All right. So what I just said was the name that is bind along with the input field. For example, in the first name input field, we know that if this particular one is triggered, so this corresponds to fname attribute, and which is equals to the name that is binded with this input field, which in turn means that if this particular input field is the onChange method from this input field is fired, so this name variable will contain the name fname, and that is precisely what we wanted to update. All right. So that means that if first field causes this handle change function to get triggered, then fname is to be updated for this lname and for this email. So in simple words, this means that we can make this name equal to value, which means retain all of the elements of previous value, and this particular attribute, which let's say in the case of first input field will be fname, this one we want to update to the newest value. All right. Let's try to see what happens if we now try to work this out. Let's first head over to our React developer tools. It takes some time to load, I don't know why. So if now we take a look inside our state, we can see all of these are there. And now if I start typing in here, what you will see is that a new entry is now being added inside this state of mine, inside this stateful object of ours. Whatever I try to write in here, it gets added as a new property, name. So why is this happening? This is because actually when we are writing this name tends to value, we are this code sandbox is actually recognizing this name as a separate string, and it thinks that we want to add some new attribute, some new key like this, and then it is updating that new attribute accordingly. Okay, so that is a problem. And what we want instead is we want this name to signify that actually we are referring to the particular field, whatever content this name contains. So in order to answer that, the simplest method or the simplest approach is to hit Google search and head over to, for example, the most popular question and answers website, the Stack Overflow one. So in here, if you can see, this particular question is precisely the one that we are having. So this user is asking that if he has this particular key equals to this, and whenever he tries to push it inside his array, it is actually creating a new key with the name of key instead of using this happy count and marking it equals to this. So if you get over here, so the before ES6 variant, we were required to create or initialize a new object and then do this in order to represent the content inside this name constant. The content, whatever is consisted inside this name variable of ours, which in our case is fname, let's say, we want this value to point to fname instead of this string name. So in the updated version with ES6 onwards, what we can do is, by simply wrapping the name variable inside these braces of ours, we can achieve the job just fine. So let's try to apply them, and I will highly recommend you to go through this particular thread and give this a read in order to understand why this actually works. So as per their suggestion, we just added these two braces. We wrapped basically the name variable of ours inside these braces, and now we hope that this should work, and the corresponding entry, the corresponding key should get updated with this value instead of the string NAME. So now if I look inside this stateful object of ours, and if I try to write inside this, you can see that it is now working seamlessly. All right. So now we know that it was because name was being identified as a string, and now we solved this issue by simply wrapping our variable inside these braces. Okay, now you can even shorten this code further. So in here, you can see, since we are returning only one thing, we can get rid of this return statement like this, and we can remove this as well, removing the semicolons, and then putting all of this in one line. So in this, actually JavaScript is confusing these braces that this is actually the body of the function. So in order to prove it that no, this is actually an object and not a body, so we will have to put it like this. And here, let me add a space here so that it makes much more sense. So the error that was coming initially was because these braces, JavaScript was actually interpreting this as the beginning and the closing of the function. But in order to signify that no, these curly braces are actually representing that we are putting an object inside these. So we wrap them inside these simple parentheses, and now you can see that all of those n number of lines of code is now reduced to a single line of code. So in here, I would also like to make a suggestion to you guys, is that, see, now we are down to just one line, okay? But always remember that you should not take away the readability and the simplicity of your code by only trying to reduce the number of lines. Although the less number of lines your code have, it appears to be more optimized and much more in a better version than the previous one. But apart from the functionality, the readability of your code is equally an important concept. So I would suggest that you keep this up till here, okay, up till here, because in this variant or in this version or in this representation of our code, we can easily understand that, okay, we have the previous value that is being retained from this object, and it is returning an object that is using the spread operator over this previous value, and this name key is getting updated with this new value. All right. So, and if we try to reduce that into one line of code, that was actually creating a lot of confusion. So always remember, there's a reason why JSON looks so ugly, as a wise man said. So that was how we actually reduced the n number of lines of our code to such a short one, basically into 2 lines of code. All right. So let me now. So that was basically what spread operator is. I hope you were able to understand that. Make sure to have a play around with the sandbox and try to visit the I will attach the link of this Stack Overflow question. Make sure to go through that. You can also read this spread operator, more about this, on the official React documentation in JavaScript. or you can even read about this on MDN docs, wherever you want. So basically what it does is it just takes out whatever data structure you apply it to. It takes out the individual elements or spread those elements and then move them or copy them or append them to wherever you want, wherever you mention this. So in the upcoming session, we'll have a little practice over whatever we learned regarding this ES6 operator, and that will help us make our muscle memory and further clear our concepts if any doubt is still remaining. As for this session, that will be all from my end, and I will see you in the next one.